They told me my trees were out of compliance. My trees. And a homeowners association that hadn't even been alive a year thought it could fine me $200 a day for not matching the neighborhood aesthetic. That was the morning I learned how dangerous small people become when you hand them a rule book and a title. My name is Garrett Caldwell. I'm 53, and I've worked the same Oregon timberland my family has held since 1884. My great-great-grandfather filed the original claim, built the first cabin, and he's buried on that land under a white oak. So when I say this place is family, I mean it literally. We have bled on it, buried on it, worked on it, and stayed. I didn't go to college. I don't own a suit. My place sits in the eastern Oregon foothills, 512 acres of working timberland, creek water, old fence, and a barn from 1889 that still leans but still stands. I manage the forest, protect the creek buffer, file the state plans, and sell timber to 2 regional mills. I know exactly what I'm doing. Then a developer from Portland named Dwight Puitt bought 38 acres from my old neighbor Walt Hennessy and turned it into Cascade Ridge Estates, 41 tidy lots, and one of those subdivisions built for people who want country living as long as it comes with matching mailboxes. Buried in the HOA covenants was a clause saying adjacent properties sharing a boundary of 50 feet or more could be pulled under HOA jurisdiction for aesthetic compliance. In plain English, if your fence touched their dream, they thought they owned your view. One foggy morning in April, Dwight's wife, Vonda, drove up my gravel road in a white Escalade, rolled down her window, and said, "You have 30 days to comply, or we fine you $200 a day." I set down my coffee, walked to the gate, and listened while she explained that my barn, my trees, and my fence were visual violations. The creek was running behind me, crows were fussing in the firs, the gravel still ticking under her tires. My hands shook after she left, not from fear exactly, more from the kind of anger that feels hot in the chest and cold in the head. And the first thing I did was nothing. That part matters. Timber teaches patience. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to swing, it's to step back and let a fool commit herself in writing. So I let the deadline pass. I cut timber-hauled logs and dropped every letter she sent into a manila folder labeled HOA nonsense. The first fine was $200, then $1,400, then more. She came back once and photographed my property from inside the SUV. The next notice listed 11 violations, including uncertified wood storage structures visible from community sightlines. That was my barn, unmanaged forest encroachment. That was the forest and non-standardized boundary markers. That was a ranch fence older than her authority. Once the paper pile got thick enough, I called my cousin Delia in Eugene. She's a paralegal, sharp-eyed, and allergic to bad drafting. I mailed her the HOA covenants, my forest plan county records, and the conservation easement on my creek buffer. 3 days later, she called me laughing. "Garrett," she said, "these people have no idea what they stepped in." The first problem was the easement. Part of the boundary they were trying to drag into HOA authority was already under a recorded conservation easement held by the county land trust. The second problem was bigger Oregon law didn't give HOAs the right to govern neighboring landowners outside the recorded plat. Their fancy adjacent property language was nonsense wearing a tie. That was the moment my anger turned useful. The fines kept coming anyway. Then Vonda sent out a man in an HOA polo shirt who introduced himself as the Community Standards Enforcement Officer and asked to inspect my boundary. I asked, "You got a warrant?" He said this was a civil matter. I said he had 30 seconds to get off my land before I called the sheriff. He left in 10. After that, Vonda tried government pressure. She filed a zoning complaint claiming my timber operation was incompatible with the surrounding residential use. Build houses next to a working forest, then act shocked when the forest behaves like a forest. My land, though, was already protected under Oregon's forest land laws, so her complaint went nowhere. That was when I called Clifton Oaks, a retired land use attorney. Clifton listened, grunted once, and said, "Sounds like they've mistaken themselves for important." Within a week, he had filed a response that got Vonda's zoning complaint dismissed. He also sent the HOA lawyer a letter that, in polite legal phrasing, basically translated to "You are very close to humiliating yourselves publicly." And then came the twist that changed everything. I was at the county records room pulling deed filings from Walt Hennessy's sale to Dwight Puitt when I found a restriction. Walt had insisted on a protected stand of old oaks along the subdivision's eastern edge. never to be cleared or developed. I drove out there that same afternoon, walked the fence line, and felt my stomach drop. Every oak was gone. There was a playground where those trees had stood, a mailbox kiosk on fresh concrete, bare dirt and stumps. Dwight had signed the restriction, then bulldozed it anyway. I took photographs, drove straight to Clifton, then went to see Walt at the assisted living place in town. Walt sat with a blanket over his knees while I handed him the photos one by one. He looked at the stumps for a long time. He took them all, he asked. Everyone. Something in his face hardened right there. That was the moment the fight stopped being just mine. Walt got his own attorney. Ellis Brewster, who ran the feed store, started quietly talking to Cascade Ridge homeowners. Once people inside that subdivision started comparing stories, the board began unraveling fast. No proper elections had ever been held. Vonda had appointed herself president, then appointed the other board members like she was casting a play. The HOA paperwork had a defective notarization. Then Vonda made the kind of mistake arrogant people always make when they start feeling the room turn against them. She got greedy and sloppy at the same time. She sent homeowners a letter offering a $500 community improvement grant if they supported the current board's management philosophy. A retired teacher in Lot 17, Gloria Whitfield, slipped that letter to Ellis. That file on my kitchen table was getting thick enough to use as a wheel chalk. The special membership meeting got forced by petition, and suddenly the room started filling. Before we even arrived, homeowners, the county paper, a bank representative, a state regulator, Walt and his attorney, everybody who mattered. Right before the meeting, Dwight called me himself, trying to settle. First, he offered to erase the fines. Then through Clifton, he offered me money not to attend. $15,000, then $30,000. That told me all I needed to know. People don't pay for silence unless they're terrified of what happens when everyone hears the same facts at the same time. The meeting was on a cold Tuesday night in November at the clubhouse. I expected maybe 20 people. There were more than 40. Vonda sat at the front in a red blazer, smiling too hard. Then she saw the bank officer, then the state rep, then Walt Hennessy in the front row, 91 years old, jaw set like an axe head. That smile started dying in pieces. Clifton opened. No theatrics. Just one clean fact after another. No legal election, defective board authority, defective notarization, state scrutiny. Walt's deed restriction lawsuit already filed, and the full list of reasons the $24,000 in claimed fines against me were legally dead on arrival. The room got so quiet, I could hear the HVAC clicking overhead. Then the woman from the bank stood up and said the loan issues were under review, and the institution expected immediate notice of all governance changes. In ordinary English, Dwight had a much bigger problem than my trees. Then I stood up. I told the room who I was, what my family's land was, what letters I'd received, what threats had been made, and what I wanted: remove every fine put in writing that my timberland was outside HOA jurisdiction and hold a lawful election. Then I looked at Vonda and said, "You sent me a notice saying my trees were out of compliance." My trees. You should hear that sentence out loud before deciding whether you still think you're the reasonable one. You could feel the mood shift. Gloria raised her hand and moved that the board resign and immediate elections be held. Somebody seconded it before she finished. The vote buried them. Vonda resigned. Rutherford resigned. Page resigned by text message while still sitting in her chair. A new interim board got elected on the spot, including Walt Hennessy, and when that old man stood, the room gave him a standing ovation. Outside, somebody had lit a burn barrel in the parking lot. Wood smoke drifted through the cold air, and I stood there warming my hands, feeling something unclench in my chest. My land was still mine, my trees were still standing, and the people who tried to put a fence around 140 years of somebody else's blood had just watched their little kingdom collapse in under 2 hours. After that, the justice came in layers. Every fine and citation against me got erased. The HOA formally acknowledged my property was outside its control, and the new board rewrote the covenants without that ridiculous adjacent jurisdiction language. Walt's case forced a settlement, and 60 native oaks got replanted. State regulators put compliance orders on the HOA's record. Around town, Vonda became one of those names people say with a half smile. The lesson I took from all of it wasn't that karma is magical. It's not. Karma usually needs binders, witnesses, dates, and people willing to stay calm while liars overplay their hand. That's the bitter truth about power. Greedy people rarely stop because they find their conscience. They stop because somebody finally makes the truth expensive. I still wake up at 5. I still drink coffee on the porch while the mist lifts off the creek. The barn still leans a little east. The Douglas firs still stand in the morning dark like they've seen every kind of fool come and go. So tell me this: when rules and paperwork get used like weapons, where do you think the line is between order and abuse? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a bully, or somebody trying to control what was never theirs, drop your story in the comments and tell me where you stand on justice revenge, and whether some people only learn when the consequences finally arrive.